Well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to start off actually with a poem about St. Mary's Church because Robin used to love walking around here. And this is called Side by Side. Just wandering side by side and stepping out to a place of deep serenity, St. Mary's Church in Tame, and watching those who keep vigilance by the sleeping stones, their faces wreathed in wistful sorrow and devout devotion. A father with his children clustered round one brown mound, the newly carved stone not yet set. A younger child in wonder, the older ones in fear, offering flowers, their ritual for years to come. Their parent tidying clumsy blooms, trying not to shed a tear. We visit the children's corner, full of hearts and tiny toys. A white and fluffy seal pup with gentle eyes, continually washed by rain and dried by sun again. And nearby we find the story of Anna, who once lived at our house. I look for the black cat that used to sleep on a boy's grave and gave comfort to a grieving father for a year or so. People came to feed the cat and chat to the man who still cries. Robin talked to him once and made him smile. I look at the same stories and remember the tales. The two stones of lovers side by side asleep that lean against each other now. The man who was killed for seeing others stealing his sheep. His wife living in a house overlooking him, building a special window. There is the grave of Robert and Mary, who died in the Black Plague. Here lie near two of my children dear. I'm sure you've seen all of that. And then there is Virginia, who lived in our house, and her husband who died there, at different corners of the graveyard. She married twice, I hear. And opposite the chantry is a memorial stone to Andy, Robin's brother. I must put the gold back on the stone. The rain keeps taking it away. Flowers from fans are always there. We walk down past the old vicarage, hand in hand, and admire the houses overlooking the village cricket pitch. Queen Anne, I thought. Georgian, he said. Returning home, I look up and remark upon the canopies of glorious autumn colours on our trees. The colour of death, Robin says. But only for the leaves, not the trees, I say. And we are content to know we are both right. Just wandering side by side and stepping back into a place of deep serenity, the prebendal in Tame. Right. Now I'm going to talk about some blind poets and bards and harpers in Ireland. And I'm doing some things for Robin later on. But this here, I thought people might like it, and especially because we've got Becki here playing the harp, and she's going to play some of the pieces. So there was one blind musician whom I met called Harry from Scotland. He played the bodhrán in the Wallace clan, descendants of William Wallace from Braveheart fame. They wore the long kilts, were in the Braveheart film, and played great Scottish music. Harry had been blind from birth, and he told me of his fear of birds that could swoop and fly from the space above with no earth ceiling at all. Put into those words, I understood his blindness and his fear immediately. In further conversation, he felt there was affinity on all sides of him, except for the ground beneath his feet, and he wondered if there was an edge to it all. As a seeing child, I thought so too. My late husband spoke of a brilliant blind keyboard player called George, who used to play the keyboards when we were on tour, who toured with the Bee Gees. One evening after the performance, George wished to discuss the next night's performance of a particular song with Robin and invited him to his hotel room. George answered the door in complete darkness because, of course, he had no need of light. And Robin duly complied with the situation and said it was a surreal experience discussing and playing the notes in the darkened room on a keyboard. I asked him why he didn't switch on the light, but he said it was normal for George, and for that hour Robin wished to relate to the world of George, to know what it was like, what it felt like, and how to be creative within it. And then he said, I often close my eyes to listen when composing on an instrument. It helps me hear better. However, negotiating the furniture would be a different challenge, I would think. He did add that they got some strange looks when room service delivered tea, so the light had to go on. So I'm going to the year 1670, and Turlough O'Carolan was a very famous harper. They call them harpers in Ireland. I think they call them harpists here. He was born at a place called Nobber, and some say it was in County Westmeath. And he had lost his sight to smallpox around 18 years old, so he had been a seeing person before that. And he honed his memory to such a degree that if he heard a tune just once, he had the ability to remember it forever. In the beginning, he was a harper learning his craft, but had a unique gift for melody and arrangement of chords that excited the senses with happy, yearning, or lamenting riffs. His popularity grew quickly throughout Ireland, and he could create new tunes with astonishing ease. He would repeat the unique Baroque style of melodies and the lyrics of the songs on his travels, playing in many different places, so that they were, in the proper Irish way, passed on in storytelling tradition, although they were not traditional folk songs or dancing music, but more classical, which was totally rare at the time. These were later notated in theory by a master of music, Edward Bunting. Then at the home of an Irish nobleman, the eminent composer was Gimignani, and he was present, and Carolan challenged him to a trial of skill to play a tune on the violin that Carolan had not heard before, and it was Vivaldi's Fifth Concerto. After playing it once, Carolan repeated it instantly on his harp, then said he in minutes could create a concerto of his own. To the astonishment of the company, he did so, and this piece has been forever known as Carolan's Concerto. And he took a few moments and composed it in his head, and he used to touch the buttons on his coat, using them as lines with spaces in between. So he was using a kind of braille to remember his notes. And he committed the patterns to memory and then instantly played it on the harp. And so now we're going to hear some more of Turlough O'Carolan. Gimignani, who then proclaimed him a genius beyond genius. On March the 25th, 1738, Turlough O'Carolan was back at the mansion house of his old patroness, Madame MacDermott, at Alderford near Boyle. Because all the big houses in Ireland, they used to have their resident harpers and bards and poets, to entertain all their guests. But he fell ill after entertaining, and he asked for his harp to play his last composition, a plaintive piece he called Farewell to Music. And immediately afterwards, he lay down to die. Farewell to Music is favoured by many harpists today, including Becki. His funeral was one of the biggest funerals that Ireland had ever seen. Gentlemen with their families who had honoured him in life came. All the houses in Ballyfarnan were occupied by people from different surrounding counties, and the fields were full of tents and wagons and vardas and makeshift shelters. Barns were made available. Everyone was in tears, and the keening was heard everywhere. There were blind poets attending who had come for miles, and he was proclaimed the head of all Irish music at the time. He was buried in the east of the old church of Kilronan, beside the MacDermott vault. Mrs. MacDermott stood with all the women to mourn the loss of her poor gentleman, the best bard in Ireland. There was a curious letter by a witness at the time that described the mound of stones on the grave, and that the skull of Carolan was on the side in a niche with an interesting indentation on it, marking him for the bardic poet he was. Then later it was stated that his skull went to Belfast as a relic and is currently in the possession of a Masonic lodge. Having undergone strange but natural changes, it is apparently used in some very sacred ceremony of the order. The bards and poets, blind or not, had very interesting lives indeed. Charlotte Milligan Fox herself was a brilliant harper, and she was the one actually who wrote a book called The Irish Harpers. And she told a story about another blind harper named Hugh Higgins, who came from County Mayo. And he talked about a blind harper called Owen Keenan at one of the harp festivals. Owen was a bit of a blind Romeo, and he was a rascal. The incident happened near Omagh. I don't know if any of you have been to County Tyrone. I'm sure you've heard of Omagh because that's where they had that terrible bomb blast. Anyway, Owen Keenan, born in 1795, it was said, was of the reckless, turbulent class, but known as a fine teacher of the harp, and he taught Arthur O'Neill himself, who was another great harpist. Keenan engaged in romantic frolics and had various escapades. One of note here, although it is fair to say he was most recklessly in love. At the prime residence of a Mr. Stewart, who had a huge mansion in Cookstown, he became enamored with a French governess with a silken tongue. And she resided with the Stewart family. And blind though he was, he contrived to make his way to her apartment by a ladder up to the window. I have no idea how he did that. The master of the house was not amused and became very offended, and he caught him in the act and had him committed to the Omagh jail in a charge of housebreaking, not wishing to shame the poor weeping governess, although it was known she had a love hankering for the harper. So anyway, Hugh Higgins, who was also blind, came from a very respectable family, and he came charging all the way from County Mayo in a very good carriage. He travelled in a better style of carriage. The jailer was away from home, but his wife was there and loved music and fine cordials. So it was reported that these harpers were particularly fluent in humouring the weaknesses of one who had once been a beauty. The result may be imagined. The blind harper, after plying her with the sweet cordial, with some kind of wine or something, while she was oppressed with love and music, he stole the keys from her pocket and then made the turnkeys very drunk and let Keenan out. And then, while he stayed behind, like another Orpheus, charming Cerberus with his lyre, Keenan marched out by moonlight with Higgins' lamp boy on his back, because they used to have the lamp boys, to hold the lamps for the coaches, to guide him over the ford of the River Struel. And the river was very close to the jail. Foolishly, he decided to go back to Killymoon again, and again got another ladder to try and get up to the woman's apartment. He scaled the house once more, ladder or no, and finally, after yet another commitment for the ladder business, as O'Neill calls it, plus a narrow escape at the county assizes, he decided that he would marry the silken-tongued Juliet. And he did, and he took her to America. He was told that he had to leave the country. Higgins, a man of respect with his lamp boy, saw no trouble at all for their dealings, And Keenan was always getting into scrapes. So he emigrated to the New World, it was called the New World at the time, after marriage, whereupon his French wife unfortunately proved unfaithful. So we can have some more harpers. There's Rose Mooney, who was one of the women harpers at the time and was very well liked. And she played the harp. And this is one of Rose Mooney's. Right. But Rose Mooney, unfortunately, her maid Mary took advantage of her blind mistress by pawning her items every so often. Any article she could to buy herself alcohol. And she had an uncommon desire for drinking that was unlimited, so anything to raise half a pint. And she led poor Rose into seedy establishments that were inseparable for poor blind harpers. But he added that we in general think that it's better for people in every situation in life to have about them the rogue they know than the rogue they don't know. So, Rose Mooney, unfortunately, she perished miserably as a victim of the drink sometime after the French invasion of Killala in 1798. That's the same time as the Battle of Vinegar Hill that happened in Ireland. The rebels forced open the Loyalist spirit stores, probably whiskey and a type of home-stilled poteen, often sold by widows to make a living. And it was thought that Mary led Rose into some of them. Rose was much respected at one time, and is certain that her maid was the principal cause of her falling into disesteem, as Mary would and did sacrifice the reputation of her mistress for a glass of whiskey and the hard stuff. So the heart was reserved for the soul, not the body or the bones. That's what she said. So now I'm going to read you the Battle of Vinegar Hill. And a very interesting thing happened at the Battle of Vinegar Hill. This is my Irish poems. So I've got to find Vinegar Hill. Seamus Heaney actually wrote a poem about this, because the boys at Vinegar Hill, there was a big battle with the yeomen who had iron weapons, and there was just a handful of lads, no weapons to spare, and they were armed with pitchforks and pike staffs and things against an iron foe. And their mothers used to give them wheat grains or barley, in their pockets, and they would suck the husks of the wheat for iron. And they also, they actually had all kinds of things going on with the wheat. They could try to make a porridge out of it or something. That was the only food they had. And when they died, they were buried where they lay. And then when the families came to try and find them, they found them because the wheat seeds had grown and made these corn and wheat that was growing in different tufts in the grass. So this is my poem to Vinegar Hill. Fields of golden heads swaying to a high wind song, whistling in a chorus of chattering ghosts, wheat shrines for those who fell upon a field of hell. The bloody battle of Vinegar Hill still toasts a barren victory for those that wronged. Just a handful of lads, no weapons to spare, armed with pitchforks and pikestaffs against an iron foe. The Wexford boys fought well, but for them tolled no bell, though in memory lives on the bravery they sowed and the priest who dared them to dare. Death quelled their shrill cries as they warred the warmed yeos. Lake took their last stronghold and earth claimed them that day. But their rations for wheat in their pockets for me, buried in the ground, took seed where they lay, and golden monuments grew to remind their foes. Many were the defeated, buried by the few. Wheat shrines rose for those who fell, starved of their bread. They had chewed the husks for iron, a shame for the loss of Miles Byrne. Father Doyle and Murphy too were the fine dead, remembered for the tufts of grain they grew. So, and then there's a lighter one here, which is potato picking. This is the time of year, actually. Well, September, October, this is the time when we pick the potatoes. And this was in Ireland. And I remember going out into the fields, with my grandmother and grandfather and cousins and aunts, and everybody was out there. And we were potato picking, and it's backbreaking. Remembering fields of chewed clay, churned up with keen steel, spitting out raw potatoes, breaking backs on a September day. Fields of cousins, aunts, a granny here or there, a father's fingers clawing earth, the haul to bags and hill pits lined with straw, biting cold, no time to stop or stare. And then the break, a blessing, flasks of steaming tea and sandwiches, soft white dough, indents of grubby prints with a first clay-filled bite. Who's to care? What a dressing. Companions with the earth, tasting, biting, chewing, swilled down with wet heat. Clambering down of sacks of spuds, a scalp around the ear for spills. Get back to work, we're not yet done. You haven't got your dinner's worth. And this is for an uncle of mine who spent about 20 years on his deathbed. He had so many operations. I think he lived on bantam's eggs and cabbage and potatoes or something. And we used to go to see him. And his father had been American. His mother was Irish. They came back and they had a little place in Ireland. And he was quite mean as well. You know, he sort of like held on to his pennies a lot. I remember actually the only time he ever parted with a penny, I think, was when I took Robin John there when he was a child. And because he'd been born in America, he gave him £1. and my mother said that we should have framed it. You know. But anyway, so this is called biding his time. Sure, he's been dying since the day he was born, and there's no fire at all will keep his bones warm. A bit of a miser, and we're none the wiser if the old boy has a grain or a stack of corn. Never a day goes past but the codger is wailing. If it isn't his heart, his head, it is failing. But we like him the same, be there wind, hail or rain, for the damp in the air is the cause of his ailing. Not without pipe, nor a stick and blue cap, he weathers the winter, lacking a wrap. Sure, he's cranky and cross, but 'twill be to our loss the day the dear rogue takes his final nap. And we used to always get signs, you know, in the family, if anybody was dying or anything, it was like, there was always this thing, there was a banshee in the family, so, you know, there was always this kind of thing that if anything, if a bird died in the house or something, you know, that, oh, well, it's just Uncle Tommy, you know, he's getting old now, it'll be him. But it was never him. And I think he lived till he was nearly 100, you know. It was really, really, I mean, we weren't hoping that he was going to die or anything, but it was quite interesting that we always used to get these signs, and we were quite, you know, if we got the signs, we weren't too afraid because we thought, well, you know, he's the one who's the oldest, he's probably going to go. Right. So, that's the Irish. And going back to Charlotte Elizabeth Milligan Fox. And she was a harper. And this is, and she wrote a poem, or well, actually somebody wrote a poem about her, because it was the very end of the harp music then. And they wrote a poem that said, upon a rock, Earn sad declined, and gave her locks dishevelled to the wind. Her cheek, which once the crimson morn displayed, was pale as Cynthia, daughter of the shade. Her harp, unstrung, was careless laid aside. She only listened to the murmuring tide and sighing gale, which scarce was heard to blow, but seemed from sympathy to breathe her woe. And so by this time, you know, she was losing some of her hearing. She was slightly scorned as the orange authoress because she came from the north of Ireland. in the plantation zone of north of Ireland. And so she was no longer able to hear her harp. But she was daring to research the Catholic Irish music. And even though her sister Alice was one of the first Protestant nationalists at the turn of the last century, Yeats actually was very jealous of Alice because she was a very good poet. So absurd, when religion never solely defined the harp, played for thousands of years before any religion, the Christian religion, and then later used in all religions, thought of as otherworldly or heavenly. So all music of any kind goes beyond colour, caste and creed. And nor is there a difference seen by musicians north and south, east or west. But the poem itself had this hidden meaning where she was being portrayed as Erin, so Ireland herself, lamenting the loss of the great age of the harpers, lamenting the changes, many of the harpers becoming wandering itinerants, relying on movement and kindness. They had no permanent home. All the big houses had gone. So they were going from place to place, no longer being sought after and giving shelter in the big houses. Many of them died. There was too much war and then famine, exile and emigration. But Ireland will never lose her music or her voice, her poetry or song. There is no magic charm greater than music and language, and no greater nation than Ireland to keep this in its heart. So, and then I met Seamus Heaney. So, this was meeting Seamus. It was at the Yeats Society. I was off into the depths of Sligo again. I don't know if you know of Seamus Heaney. He's the poet that now is, revered all over Ireland. So I was on a pilgrimage to meet your man Seamus, the rare maestro of the quill. And he was a hero. He was bred in County Derry, and I was in Tyrone, So I was very aware of his poetry at the time. And he wrote books like Door in the Dark, The Whole Lantern, Sweeney Astray. So I made my way to a poetry workshop at the Yeats Society. And it was really good because I was mad about Yeats and Joyce, Wilde, Dean, Tobin, Mahon, Flann O'Brien, all of the different poets. So we were determined to spoil ourselves and meet, the Wizard of Words, right? So I had written a poem called Mullaghmore, which I read to you, right? And I read it aloud in front of Seamus, and he gave me a thumbs up and requested that I recite it again. So I was really happy about that. I was on cloud 9. I don't know where that is, but anyway. A very elderly, shy lady was there, and she was dressed in a brown raincoat, which she never removed. Her handwritten papers were in a knitted shopping bag, Her hair was spun silver in a bun. She was very quiet, serene, and she wouldn't read any of her poetry. And on the second last day, she was at last persuaded to read her poems. "Have no fear," says he. "We started as strangers, but you're among friends here." So she took courage and she read words that danced into our heads, wrapped us in our minds, took us clean away. She was a brilliant poet. Seamus Heaney got up and he gently steered her to his vacated chair, and we all knew why. And then he taught from her seat for the rest of the day, which I thought was amazing. And then later at dusk, I saw him standing alone on a bridge in the town, looking into a river. It was actually the River Caravogue, but I didn't know that at the time. I forgot that it's the shortest river in Ireland. It flows through Sligo to the Atlantic. And my heart did a double take flip, But I didn't approach him. He was just standing there. And his solitude was his alone, So I wrote a very short poem, The Poet, for Seamus Heaney. I watched you, alone, a man besieged, dumping thoughts into the murky depths of some nameless river. Each one a droplet of reason, and I, the intruder, just by presence or passing look, would gladly drink it dry. So that was my poem to Seamus. And then later, nobody had bought him any tea or coffee all day, and I thought, oh, well, may I get you tea or coffee? And he said, I'm dying of the druth. Well, the druth in Ireland means, that you're thirsty and you want something to drink. So he said, I'm dying of the druth, he answered with a big sigh of relief. Coffee, if it's no bother. And thank you, Dwina, he said, looking me straight in the eyes. So I was very happy he remembered my name. I remembered the smile in his eyes. It gave my spirits yet another rise. I knew that the Ulster phrase, and he knew that I knew it too, which was good. So I ran into the little kitchen to make him not one, but 2 cups of coffee. And then I wanted to present them as befits a king, So I found a lid of an empty biscuit tin, and I dressed it up, quickly double folding a napkin, and I cut designs all around it, and all through with scissors I found, and it looked like a lace doily, so I put it on the biscuit tin lid. And then underneath I slipped the poem, that I'd kept in my pocket. And I thought to myself, gosh, I'm a fan. He drank the first cup and then signed the whole lantern to me. And he wrote in it, writing our names there, Seamus Heaney. I never knew if he found my poem or not, for I fled shortly afterwards, finding the cut bits of doily in my pocket, not wanting to leave a mess back there. And then, when I came back to England, the book disappeared or it was stolen, and it caused me a lot of distress. And I realized it was actually printed by Four Courts Press in Dublin. So I got him kindly to sign another, and he did. He signed it for me again, to my surprise. So it was a grand week that week. But then it saddened me, to hear of his demise when he died in 2013. But I heard that his son Michael announced that a few minutes before his father died, he sent a text message, his last words, to his wife Marie in Latin, Noli timere, which means do not be afraid. And that was the end. So that was my little bout with Seamus Heaney. Right, so I don't know how much time we have left on the first half. So now, Irish harp for Seamus. So I've got one poem which is an invocation, actually, for the end of the first half. I invoke the love that surmounts the agony of love itself, and yearn for the learning that makes minds bright from dull. I invoke the silence that culls and soothes all chattering anger, and makes hearts beat more with goodness from the core. I invoke the lonely to find safe solitude in their exile, and pray for piety and affection to offer kind protection for the weak. I invoke all seekers to find the knowledge they desire and seek, and urge the treasure of skill to fall upon godly doings, to seal the measure of all arts with mirth and pleasure. I invoke the abundance of happiness to surpass its redundance, and call for radiant beauty to bloom when youth has aged to sage. I invoke strength to invigorate health and wealth of souls and goods, and to make candor and bravery flourish with virtue and valor. All of this I invoke without greed or need or bearing of sorrow. All of this I invoke not from the past or the morrow, but now. All of this I ask from the seed of love never sown nor grown, and implore the power of truth to emerge from the pool of lies. I invoke all this to arise from that which is hidden from eyes. I invoke all this to make wisdom known in the weary and worn. I invoke all this so that the stalwart and stern will be just and wise, and that hearts torn with grief will heal and be made whole at last. All of this I invoke from the past or the morrow, but now.